going on, everyone? Welcome back to another video. This video is going to be a bit of a conversation. We're going to talk about why this Portland Trail Blazers team next year might be different than it has been in years past, despite them running it small again. But first, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button. Subscribe to our second channel, Blazers Uprise Live, link in the description box below. And we will be live streaming the Summer League game later tonight, going live between 8 and 8:30 p.m. Summer League games have been starting later, so we don't know when that game's going to start, but we'll be live streaming the Summer League game against the New York Knicks, I believe. Now, me and Eric were outspoken on the Gary Payton II signing in terms of being frustrated with how the front office and a lot of the fans said that they just wanted more size, and then the front office went and got a 6'2" guy as their main signing and are running it small again. Now, me and Eric in the past have said that you can be competitive with a smaller lineup. We've believed in smaller Portland Trail Blazers lineups more so than other fans in the past, so we didn't have necessarily as much of a problem in going small. There was just a lot of contradictions and inconsistencies with what the front office said they were going to do going into the offseason and then what they did, and in terms of what a lot of fans said they wanted and then what they ended up being happy with. We were also frustrated because the Gary Payton II signing hard capped the Portland Trail Blazers, thus making numerous trades impossible, such as maybe Kevin Durant. The only way the Portland Trail Blazers could trade for Kevin Durant at this point is if they gave up Damian Lillard, which obviously is not going to happen. Well, actually, they can't give up Damian Lillard because he just signed an extension. So I actually think it is literally impossible for the Blazers to trade for Kevin Durant. They are hard capped. Their salary can't go past $157 million. Right now, it's right around $150 million. And that hard cap is in place because the Blazers signed Gary Payton II to the full mid-level exception. A lot of people misconstrued our frustrations to be about Gary Payton II as a player, but as a player, he makes a lot of sense for this Portland Trail Blazers team as a phenomenal defensive piece. So with everything I've talked about in the rear view, let's look ahead. The Blazers are betting on small ball again, but I don't think it's going to be like last year. We're going to compare and contrast this team as it stands right now with last year's Portland Trail Blazers team and some of the differences between both. Now, last season, a lot of people chalked up the Blazers' defensive shortcomings on just a lack of size, but I thought the problems ran a lot deeper than that. Yes, size is definitely a benefit, don't get me wrong. However, there's much more to it. I've always said that if you are an undersized team, you have to make up for it with scrappiness, hustle, and heart. I know those things sound kind of cliche, but if you're giving up size to your opponent, you gotta battle them. You gotta be physical on the perimeter. You gotta be swiping for that ball when they put it on the floor. You gotta be flying around in passing lanes, playing proper help defense in a more timely manner since you have to get to spots earlier when you don't have the length to just contest and block shots. There's a lot of little nuanced things that you have to do on the defensive end as an undersized team to not only win your one-on-one matchups, but also to help make things easier for your teammates in their matchups. In terms of competitiveness, hustle, and heart and scrappiness, the Blazers did not have that last year. I was extremely frustrated with Norman Powell numerous times for just not being competitive on the defensive end. It seemed like Norman Powell didn't really want to be in Portland, and there was way too many times where he would complain about a foul call instead of running back on defense while everybody else on the court ran past him. Meanwhile, you had Robert Covington at the 4 who had some defensive regression. He was never that great on the ball, but he was always a really good off-ball team defender. However, Robert Covington started hunting for steals, was never in the right position on the defensive end. And when you combine that with the fact that Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum were the starting two guards in the backcourt, that was an issue. Now, the Blazers did have a good start to the season at home. Defensively, they started off 10-1 and had some really good defensive games. They locked up a pretty healthy Memphis Grizzlies team. They locked up a Phoenix Suns team, blew blew them both out in Moda Center. At the start of the season, CJ McCollum was actually playing pretty good defense. He was in the right spot more often than not, and he was competitive, he played scrappy, and he was not a negative on that end of the floor despite giving up a little bit of size. I remember doing a film breakdown of the game where the Blazers beat the Phoenix Suns, and CJ McCollum's defense was actually giving Devin Booker some fits. And with the home court fans on their side, the Blazers came out with the proper amount of energy and hustle and scrappiness in the first 10 games at home last season. That's how they started 10-1 at home. The problem was they started off pretty much the opposite on the road. I think they were 1-10. Let me know what their record was if that's wrong. But they started off horribly on the road, and that's why they were a 500 team about 20 games into the season. On the road, the Blazers had absolutely no energy, no fight, no heart. It was one of the most frustrating things I've ever watched as a diehard Portland Trail Blazer fan. Yes, home court advantage is a thing, but it should not be that much of an advantage. And the effort and mentality and all those cliche things were actually pretty obvious when you watch the Blazers at home versus on the road. Not to mention you had Damian Lillard not playing like his old self. He was hurting, he was struggling, and Dame couldn't bail the Blazers out of a couple of road losses that they would have won if they had the old Damian Lillard. And in the end, last season fell apart, and a lot of people blamed a lack of size. However, I think the biggest issue last year was the lack of heart that the Blazers played with, the lack of competitiveness they played with. Now, if they had more size, they probably could have gotten away with not playing as scrappy, not playing as hard. Length is able to make up for that a little bit, but instead, the Blazers bet on small ball again, but brought in guys that will compete on the defensive end night in, night out. Now, what's funny is me and Eric talked about how the Blazers needed a tone setter on the defensive end, a guy who could be the heart and soul of the Blazers team. One of the guys me and Eric identified as potentially being that type of player is Josh Hart, who's now a Portland Trail Blazer. Another guy who fits that mold very, very well is Gary Payton II, who's also now a Portland Trail Blazer. The Blazers bet on small ball again. However, they went out and they got some heart. They got some guys that play hard, and now you have some tone setters on the defensive end. That is the main reason why I think this year could be different for the Portland Trail Blazers. Now, CJ McCollum's gone. Norman Powell's gone. Offensively, there are a couple of question marks, but assuming Damian Lillard can get back to old Dame, maybe he might have his best season this year now that he's not dealing with the injury pain that he's dealt with the past 4 or 5 years. If Anthony Simons can continue his development, Jeremy Grant is maybe the most complete offensive forward the Blazers have had since LaMarcus Aldridge. Offensively, the Blazers should be a pretty good team. It's always been about, can the Blazers be good enough defensively? Now, you still have an undersized backcourt that's questionable defensively with Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons now, who replaces CJ McCollum. However, Dame being healthier does give me some optimism that maybe he can be an average defensive player. The Blazers maybe not putting as much responsibility for him creating the offense and instead moving to a more team-based offense that moves the ball more, moves players more, gives other players a little bit more responsibility, should hopefully help Damian Lillard maybe get easier shots on the offensive end and still put up potentially 30 points per game, but could also help him not have to expend as much energy on the offensive end, thus saving some energy for the defensive side of the ball. I think Chauncey Billups will hold Damian Lillard accountable on the defensive end this season. I'm expecting a solid defensive year from Dame because there's never been a reason other than the injury and maybe a little bit of a lack of size as to why Damian Lillard should be a bad defensive player. He's athletic, he's agile, he's a competitive guy, he's strong as well. I think Damian Lillard can be an average defender. If he's an average defender, then that's actually a really good start to the Blazers becoming an average defensive team. Obviously, with the Blazers being a bottom 5 defensive team, I mean, average would be a huge step up. Anthony Simons, I think, can be a better defender than CJ McCollum. I think Anthony Simons is really good getting through screens. Defensive analytics back that up as well. There's just some technique things that need to be cleaned up for Simons, but I think he's a guy that wants to get better on the defensive end, and I think he can be a little bit better of a defensive player than CJ McCollum was. That's not saying much, but if that comes true, the Blazers starting guards are already better defensively than they were last season. But now it starts with whoever the starting 3 is for the Blazers. Last year was Norman Powell. he was undersized for the 3, but he also did not play hard enough, he wasn't competitive enough, and he was really bad defensively for stretches. There were times where he would step up on the defensive end and take a challenge head on and actually play some good defense against some bigger forwards. He had a game against Paul George last year where he played some phenomenal defense on PG, and PG struggled in that game. However, those occurrences were too rare, and now I think Norman Powell gets replaced with Josh Hart at the starting small forward spot this year. Josh Hart is actually a little bit more undersized than Norman Powell. He's taller than Powell, but he has a shorter standing reach. But Josh Hart has guarded forwards adequately, if not well, for his entire NBA career. There's been times where he's played power forward, and he hasn't been a defensive liability at that spot. The main reason why is Josh Hart is a competitor. Josh Hart plays hard, night in, night out. He makes up for a lack of length and size with some strength, but he's not a guy who's afraid to get into a ball handler and play physical on the perimeter. And I think Josh Hart is going to be a clear-cut defensive upgrade over Norman Powell if he starts at the 3. Jeremy Grant at the 4, I think, is comparable to Robert Covington in a number of ways. I think they are both better defending off the ball. Both can protect the rim a little bit. With Jeremy Grant, the one thing that bugs me is he sucks getting through screens. He's bad getting through screens. People don't realize that. I think that's the main reason why his on-ball defense isn't that good. You run a ball screen at him and he just takes horrible angles through it. His footwork through it is bad. His technique is bad getting through screens. If that's something that can be cleaned up, then I have more faith in him as an on-ball guy. However, I don't think Jeremy Grant's really much of a downgrade from Robert Covington. I think they are similar defenders, and as long as Jeremy Grant just doesn't hunt steals as much as Rocco did, and as long as Grant is in the right position off the ball defensively, then he will be a positive contributor on that end. And then Jusuf Nurkic is Jusuf Nurkic. He started the season last year. I think you're going to see probably the same level of defense from Nurkic. Hopefully it can be a little bit better. He did improve defensively, I thought, over the last month that he played of last season. Hopefully he's able to carry that over into this year. But off the bench, the Blazers now have Gary Payton II, who is an elite defender no matter who he's guarding. Despite being 6'2", Gary Payton II is just an outlier as a defensive player. The dude has a knack for disrupting ball handlers, for blocking shots even, for getting steals, playing passing lanes. He is an absolute disruptor. He lives up to his father's name. Gary Payton, of course, was one of the best defensive players of his generation, and now GP2 is following in his footsteps. If you look at advanced analytics, they grade out Gary Payton II as one of the top 5 on-ball defenders in the league, and it doesn't matter if he's guarding a point guard, a shooting guard, a small forward, even a power forward. You can go watch some of his footage guarding guys like Nikola Jokic, guarding guys that are much bigger than him, and somehow, some way, he finds a way to be a good defensive player against guys that have a 6, 7, or 8 inch advantage on them in terms of height, in terms of length. Gary Payton II is going to be the guy to watch this year if you think that you can't be a good defensive player against forwards if you're a 6'2 or 6'3 guard. You can, it's extremely hard. Only a few players in the league can actually defend forwards at that size at a really high level. Gary Payton II is one of them. He's a tone setter defensively as well. If you have him and Josh Hart out there on the floor busting their ass defensively, it's going to be hard for other guys to slack off. Defensive effort is a bit of a contagious thing. Why bust your ass playing defense hard, giving a ton of effort on that end, if the ball just gets swung and your teammate lets his ball handler drive right past him without much of a care in the world? Why would you play hard yourself if it doesn't even matter because you have teammates out there on the floor next to you that don't bring that same level of intensity? And vice versa. If you have teammates that are playing hard defensively, that's going to make you want to play hard defensively too. Defensive effort is contagious. I think it was contagious last year. You'd have guys slacking off, and it would affect pretty much everybody on the team with a lack of energy. That's why I said you need tone setters on the defensive end. The Blazers had none last year. They didn't have like a heart and soul of their defense. Now they have 2 of them. If you look at pretty much every elite team in the NBA, there is a player who's like the heart and soul of their defense. With the Boston Celtics, it's obviously Marcus Smart. With the Golden State Warriors, it's Draymond Green. With the Phoenix Suns, it's Mikal Bridges. With the Miami Heat, it's Jimmy Butler. With the Memphis Grizzlies, you got Dylan Brooks. With the Milwaukee Bucks, you got Drew Holiday. You could also throw Giannis potentially into that conversation. Every top team in the standings in the regular season last year had a guy who was the heart and soul of their defense, a guy that you could point to and be like, yeah, that's their top tier defender, elite defensive player, plays hard defensively pretty consistently, if not all the time. The Blazers just did not have that. Now, I would throw Gary Payton II into the conversation with any of those other defensive players in terms of a guy that's a tone setter defensively, and Josh Hart belongs in that conversation as well. You got Nasir Little as a good on-ball defender who I think is set to have a bit of a step up defensively next season. A lot of his struggles defensively last year came off the ball where he was kind of a mess, but a lot of the things were fixable. On the ball, he was a really good defensive player last season, so I'm also excited to see what Nasir Little brings to the table defensively. He also has to be a part of this conversation. Now, given their starting backcourt and their lack of size, can the Blazers ever be a truly elite defensive team as they're built currently? Probably not, but it's not about becoming an elite defensive team. It's about becoming a good enough defensive team because the Blazers have the potential to once again be an elite offensive squad. You just need the defense to be good enough. My expectations are that hopefully they are average defensively next year. If you have a borderline top 5 offense and if you have an average defense, that should be around a top 10 team in the league. Now, in terms of the defensive identity for the Blazers this upcoming season, given that they're smaller, I think they're going to try and play a little bit more physically on the perimeter, not let guys turn the corner and drive downhill to be able to use their potential length advantage. I think you're going to continue to see Chauncey Billups employ a scheme where he has Yusuf Nurkic or whoever's guarding the screen or play up at the level of the screen defensively. The problem was last year, teams would just pick that apart, hitting the roll man easily, and then he would be able to skip it out to the corner as the defense rotated. The Blazers defense last year didn't rotate fast enough. I'm hoping that with the new defensive pieces that the Blazers added this year, you'll have guys that'll rotate faster, maybe pick the pocket of the rolling big man once he catches the pass. Gary Payton II is really good at that. And overall, good defense is usually played on a string where guys are rotating, covering for each other, and then filling in the gaps behind that. The Blazers just didn't do that last year. I think this year's team could be a team that does that, and if they do, then they could be an average defensive team and be able to play more aggressively on the perimeter, knowing that they will have proper help behind them. Last year, you just didn't have that at all. So anyway, let me know what you think about the things that I said in this video. This is why I think that the Blazers small ball bet might actually pay off this year. There's going to be some struggles given their lack of size, in my opinion. However, I don't think it has to doom them to being a bottom 5 defense in the league. I think they can be at least average, and if they're at least average, it's going to be an interesting and fun season. Anyway, that's a wrap for this video. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.